All right, good evening, everybody. We're just letting everyone in here. Might give it just a minute to be sure it gets in. We'll be starting our conversation with Russ Boulding shortly. While we're waiting for just a second, Kate, you're muted, but you can give a nod. Am I coming through okay? Can you see my face? I'd say beautiful face, handsome face, beautiful.
Well, I'm seeing myself, not you, so you should be highlighted.
Okay, as long as it's working the way it's supposed to be. That's what I want to be sure before I get going. I want to be sure I'm doing it right. So just a sec, we will get on with the show. So what do you think, Kate? Shall I begin the introduction? All righty. Well, once again, everyone, thank you so much for waiting in the waiting room and the internet sphere of Zoom. My name is John Lawrence, and of course, I'm the executive director of Sycamore Land Trust. And I wanted to thank you all very much for joining us tonight for a conversation with Russell Boulding entitled Geology of Sycamore Nature Preserves. So after just a brief introduction about Sycamore, I will turn it over to Russell, the star of the show. This virtual lecture is a part of our Conservation Conversation series, say it 5 times fast, featuring authors and local experts who inspire us to get involved in local conservation. Recordings of our conversation, there you go. Recordings of our Conservation Conversation series lectures will be available on our website at sycamorelandtrust.org/conversation. And of course, you can find that on our website too. Let's see here. All right. On our website, you can take a look at our last virtual lecture, which was It Takes a Village to Raise a Chick. Look at that cute little peregrine falcon there up on probably a high rise in Indy. This was a conversation with Alison Marie Gillette, our state ornithologist at the Indiana DNR. So a little bit about Sycamore. We are a nonprofit conservation organization. We were founded in 1990, and now we protect more than 125 properties across southern Indiana, totaling actually just as of last week, a little over 11,000 acres. Our mission is to preserve the beauty, health, and diversity of southern Indiana's natural landscape through strategic land conservation, habitat restoration, and environmental education. There you can see some neat geology at our Canyon Forest Nature Preserve that Russell will be talking about. So, see some of our details there. Sycamore also maintains over 30 miles of public hiking trails on 13 of our nature preserves, including one of the longest boardwalks in the Midwest at our Bean Blossom Bottoms Nature Preserve here in Monroe County. We also have an environmental education program, which connects thousands of people of all ages to nature through guided hikes and free outdoor nature programming for local schools and community organizations. And this work, it's all about teamwork. This is all about you. It's powered by over 1,300 annual members that support us and hundreds of volunteers. Sycamore preserves land by acquiring and maintaining high-quality natural areas in areas where they can have the most impact, such as land adjacent to other protected properties to create corridors of protected habitat. Here's a lovely example. Our priority project areas like this here, our Bean Blossom Creek Bicentennial Conservation Area in Monroe and Brown counties, It protects critical habitat in the Bean Blossom Creek watershed, which is a major tributary of the West Fork White River, and another property we'll be hearing about tonight. Our projects to manage and restore natural habitat in 2022, this past year, included constructing two new wetland areas here in this photo at our fixed stolting preserve in Monroe County, also on the Bean Blossom Creek. We planted 26,000 native trees between this preserve and the Sam Shine Preserve, just upstream. We also created new pollinator meadows from seed that we sustainably collected on our preserves. And then our volunteers helped grow them into plant plugs and help plant them. And the depressions that you can see, especially kind of down at the lower part of the photo, are these new wetland areas that have been filling in with water with the rain this fall and winter, which will be creating important new habitat for birds, amphibians, and other wildlife. And to inspire our community to get involved in habitat restoration, our environmental education program provides free hands-on learning, including native tree plantings at local schools and growing native plants from seed. And look at that group of kids having fun, getting dirty. In today's lecture, Russell will be talking about some significant geological features at Sycamore's public nature preserves. However, Sycamore also protects significant geological features at many other nature preserves that we just aren't able to open to the public. And here's a neat example. This is the Clemens Place at Clifty Creek in Greene County, which was recently dedicated as a state nature preserve by the state of Indiana and the DNR, which means it is recognized as one of the most significant natural areas in Indiana. This preserve protects significant geological features, including a portion of the Clifty Creek Canyon, which features some of these lovely sandstone bluffs you see behind me, and a karst sink. And there you go. Let me flip back and forth real fast. Pay attention to that big rock behind that guy there. Should look a little bit familiar. This area along Clifty Creek was identified, decades ago by the Indiana's Natural Areas Registry, which was an effort to identify and then lead to the protection of the most important natural areas in Indiana. And this photo here comes from the 1921 Handbook of Indiana Geology, which was published by the then Department of Conservation. And, there's a whole write-up in there by Clyde Mallett, Russell, correct me there. Thank you, who is a very, very important Indiana geologist. In addition to these really neat geological features, the preserve also has some wonderfully nice and mature oak hickory forest. Unfortunately, we're not able to open it to public access because of really no public road access available. But it's really important that we are able to protect it for its conservation value and to preserve the important habitat there for wildlife and plants, as well as these really important geological features. And if you like learning about geology, and of course you do because you're here, there is just so much that Russell can talk about that he can't fit it all in tonight's lecture. So please join us for part 2 on Thursday, April the 13th, which will be Geology of Canyon Forest Nature Preserve in Amy Weingartner Brannigan Peninsula Preserve. Once again, featuring Russell. The Amy Weingartner Brannigan Peninsula Preserve, has some very unique geological features, and you can see on this map it's a very interesting peninsula that juts out into the lake, and well, Russ can tell you about it in April. And if you joined us for tonight's lecture, you will receive a free link in your email to join us for part 2. So please plan to be there. And of course, if you have any questions about Sycamore's work and how you can get involved, please, please, please get in touch with us. You can also request a nature preserve guide with hiking maps of our 13 public nature preserves at sycamorelandtrust.org/explore. Or just go to the website and it's easy to find. Now, all about Russell. I'd like to welcome him here. He is a very good friend of Sycamore, and as you can see, has a lot of wonderful experience. He now claims to be a retired geologist, but as you will hear, he's certainly been very busy in his supposed retirement, doing some really interesting research and sharing that information with Sycamore on our preserves. And I first met Russell back when we were purchasing the Lower Hare Nature Preserve at Downey Hill. And he was a freelance consultant at that time, and we wanted to have an environmental evaluation done. And we got hooked up with Russell. And not only did that introduce him to us, but us to him, because as you'll hear, while Russell was out there, he saw some very interesting geology at Downey Hill that he has come back many times since to investigate more. And he's also, and along with all that volunteering, he also kindly helped us out as a very hardworking volunteer, helping with conservation easement monitoring for several seasons, which was a big, big help. So, oh, and let me not forget to mention that he comes from is now part of a famous geology family. His wonderful wife, Bonnie, is also a geologist, and if I'm not incorrect, a Bloomington native. Certainly she was here in high school, because I know she was in my Aunt Marty's high school class. And of course, her dad and Russell's father-in-law is the one and only Dr. Henry Gray, who is he would blush to hear this, but a real, how do you even put it? One of the great
grand old man of Indiana geology.
Yes, that's the best way of, yes, absolutely. He's done just so much seminal work. And let's see, last year he turned 100 years young and going for 101 this year. So very exciting. So if you're listening, Henry, keep at it. And I believe he also contributed to this talk tonight. So anyway, without further ado, thanks again, Russell. Really appreciate it. And I will turn it over to you. I'll stop sharing and let you take over.
Okay, thank you, John. And good to see so many people and many good friends. Let me bring this up. Let's see how we go here. Okay. Yeah, since I retired in 2017, was it? At the age of 70, I have been having the time of my life. After 40 plus years of working on projects that other people had me, were telling me to do, I have had the freedom to do what I want, and this is one of the results of that. Okay, so I'd like to say just a little bit about the format before I start talking. This presentation will be made available after it's finished. I may make some minor changes to it as a result of questions and discussion, but this will be available for download. And I've set it up so that there are a number of different types of links. There's links that allow you to move around the website, go back to index, takes you back to the major sections. These links will take you to the slides on specific preserves. There are also links that provide references to documents or web pages that can be viewed or downloaded, and also links that provide additional information about terminology. So with no further ado, we'll start out with physiography of South Central Indiana. This is from my father-in-law, Henry's Physiography of South Central Indiana. And the numbers are approximate locations of Sycamore's 12 public preserves. That's what I focused on. And if you download this link will take you to allow you to download a copy of the preserve guides. These links will take you to the webpage that has the map and information about the different preserves. So here, the 12 preserves that we'll be focusing on fall within 3 major physiographic provinces. The Norman Upland, the brown area here, most of them are located there. You have one preserve in the Mitchell Plateau, limestone plateau, and then a couple of preserves in the Crawford Upland. Also on this map are the approximate locations of the Wisconsin glacial boundary, which is outside the area of preserves we'll be looking at, and the location of the pre-Wisconsin glacial boundary here. And we have some really interesting glacial features at a number of the preserves. Here, regional geologic overview. They're in South Central Indiana. We're on the kind of eastern edge of what's called the Illinois Basin. These are structural basins, the Michigan Basin, the Appalachian Basin, that especially during Mississippian and Pennsylvanian times were covered by extensive oceans, deposited limestone, many different types of sedimentary deposits. And the Illinois and Appalachian Basin are separated by the Cincinnati Arch. And we'll have a look at how that affects the sediments in a later slide. So the sediments in these basins are Paleozoic in age, and with the oldest sediments outcropping on the arch here, and then progressively younger sediments progressing to the southwest. Now, when I say older and younger, we're talking on the order of sediments deposited hundreds of million years ago. Here's a section of the geologic map of South Central Indiana. Again, one of Henry's maps. These locations are approximate. And I've given a legend here that shows the major formations that are within these 3 physiographic regions. And I have highlighted or in italics with links to the Indiana Geological Survey has web pages that describe these. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this, but anyone who is interested in exploring further in detail can check out these. So we have Mississippian Borden group, Sandra's group is present at a couple of preserves. The Blue River group represents most of the Mitchell Plateau. And then a very interesting feature is, which is present at the Canyon Forest Preserve is that there is a major, what's called a disconformity between the, just gotta see an error, I've got to correct this. That's not Permian, that's Pennsylvanian. My apologies. I've read this through so many times, but that's the Permian, these Permian epoch. So the at the end of the Mississippian epoch, the sedimentation stopped, there was erosion of the land surface, and then the deposition began again of the Mansfield Formation, which actually cuts across almost all the earlier Paleozoic sediments in the state. Here's a cross section. It's not exactly a cross section of the area where our preserves are, so I've only shown a few that illustrate how the preserves fit in the cross section. But you can see you've got the Cincinnati Arch up here. Sediments are dipping down to a southwestward direction toward the Illinois Basin. And we've got the Tangeman Woods and Touch the Earth on the Norman Upland at the base of the Dobson Escarpment, which I meant to point out on the physiography. That's a major physiographic feature of the Norman Upland. And then we also have the Cedars Preserve at the edge of the Mitchell Plateau and the start of the West Baden Formation, and the Porter Preserve also is in that transition. And here's some stratigraphic section of the major formations and groups of sediments. And I've put in the numbers of the preserves approximately where they are on the stratigraphic section. So we have Tangeman Woods and Touch the Earth in Bartholomew County, actually east of the Dobson Escarpment. They're near the transition to the Scottsburg Lowland, but those sediments are at the base of the Borden. In general, the Borden Formation consists almost entirely of siltstone. There are a few discontinuous layers of limestone. And here in the key, the blue here are limestones. This gray hatched is shale, mudstone, siltstone. And then the stippled are sandstone in terms of the nature of the sediments. But most of our preserves, where bedrock is exposed, are in the Borden Formation. Got a few preserves that have, in the transition from the Borden to the Sanders group, the Jeremy Keith Oakley Preserve, and Amy Weingartner. And then we've got a few preserves that are near the top of the limestones of the Borden group. And then going farther up the stratigraphic section, Indiana has pretty much the entire Mississippian section. There may be some sediments that are missing at this disconformity, but at 318 million years, deposition of the Mississippian sediment stopped, and deposition of the Pennsylvanian stuff began with the Mansfield Formation being the very characteristic formation that is draped across the eroded surface of the Mississippian or the whole Paleozoic section. Here's a quaternary map of South Central Indiana, and glacial geology is a subject very near and dear to my heart. So the quaternary geologic period includes the modern Holocene epoch, began around 12,000 years ago at the close of the most recent Wisconsin glaciation. The Pleistocene epoch began about 2.6 million years ago, and at the close of the Tertiary. So quaternary deposits in South Central Indiana were mostly deposited during the Illinoisan stage. And I've given a little key to some of the colors here, but we'll be looking more closely at these features in the individual preserves, so I won't go into detail there. And this is another overview, provides a nice overview of bedrock and quaternary geology of Sycamore preserves. This comes from a really nice website called soilexplorer.net, and it's based on county soil surveys. So it's taken the soil surveys that have been made, which involves very detailed mapping, and then it groups the different soil series and soil map units into larger units. So it gives a really good perspective on both the bedrock, where bedrock is near the surface, and the glacial and Holocene geology. So here, just briefly, the tan color is mostly siltstones of the Norman upland. And so this matches pretty closely the physiographic map. The red here, though I think my wife Bonnie told me she would call it pink, are limestone soils on the Mitchell Plateau. And the tan to the west of the Mitchell Plateau are mixtures of sandstone, shales, and limestones of the Crawford Upland. In terms of soils formed in glacial loss, well, formed in, okay, all of Indiana is blanketed with 5 plus up to more than up to say 10 feet of windblown Wisconsin age Aeolian material called loess. So the soils forming glacial loess over glacial tills include Wisconsin tills. We see a little bit of gray up here again outside of, we're not going to see these preserves, but then the purple are glacial tills of Illinoisan age. Then other soils are generally alluvial soils, unconsolidated soils. They're formed on terraces and floodplains. And we'll look a little more closely at some of these features in the individual preserve. So here we have Tangman Woods and Touch the Earth, nestled at the base of the Knobston, east of the Knobston Escarpment. The map on the left shows the boundaries on Google Earth, and a number of preserves were put together with multiple acquisitions so that you see some see other boundaries within the preserve, like the one that touched the earth. So here we get a view from using Soil Explorer. We can see that on the central part of Tangaman Woods, we've got the Borden siltstones, a little bit in the eastern edge of Illinois and Till. On the western edge, we've got the floodplain, modern floodplain. So nice diversity of soils and geology. The touch the earth, mostly most of the higher parts of the landscape are glacial tills. If you go down there, you'll find a mixture of clay and rock, and it can be quite, the lithology can be fairly diverse. And then we've got some terraces, fine-grained alluvium along this little channel that runs through the middle of the preserve, which has modern alluvium. I wasn't able to find this when I went looking for it, but this is a nice example of a glacial erratic. Looks to me like it's probably quartzite, and we'll be talking more about glacial erratics in the next preserve. But this is, I guess I'll say I've walked all the trails and I didn't see rocks this big. I saw pretty much some gravel in the stream beds. So Laura Hare Preserve at County Hill. This is a fabulous preserve, as John was saying. This was my first. Well, this is when I did the phase 1 environmental site assessment for this preserve in 2010. That's what laid the seed for all the work I've been doing on glacial geology of South Central Indiana since then. The wonderful trails here, these yellow pins show quartzite, mostly quartzite boulders. I was just, I was astonished. I walked every ravine on this property, and when I came across, here we go, DH01. I'm gonna jump down so you can see it here. This, I was, it just blew my mind. You can see the bedrock of the channel, this narrow little channel incised into the siltstone, and this big quartzite boulder. The closest, and this was beyond the map glacial boundary. Several miles south to the north, there are glacial tills not too far to the east. And but when I saw this, I knew there had been a glacier there. That had been brought some 500 miles from the Canadian Shield. So in the course of doing the phase 1, I identified, I think 7 or 8 boulders. Subsequent visits, I've identified, I think a dozen boulders. In terms of terminology, boulder is a size class. Anything larger than 10.5 inches is considered to be a boulder. 2 to 10.5 inches is cobble size. Less than 2 inches is gravel down to sands. So the old county road that crosses the center of the preserve marks the divide between the North Fork and the South Fork of Salt Creek. And what's really interesting, another really interesting feature, which is just off the preserve, is this green here. These are sandy outwash terraces. And Liberty Creek, which is a minor tributary now to Salt Creek, North Fork of Salt Creek, was a major glacial sluiceway during the Illinoisan glacial period. So again, here's a picture of a couple of the boulders. Most of the boulders I found are quartzite. There are some other lithology, some granites, but I think over 90% of the boulders that I've mapped are quartzite. And another really interesting, I think unusual geologic feature at the Lower Hare Preserve are septarian concretions that are exposed in a much almost, I think it's still a siltstone, but it almost fine grained enough to almost be a shale. And these concretions weather out, have weathered out of, they're embedded in a matrix of a kind of a blue, very fine grained siltstone. So, moving on farther west to Bean Blossom Watershed, we've got Trevlack Bluffs and Bob Clowder Lake Lemon Woods. This kind of shows the trails, and this shows the two preserves with Trevlack Bluffs here in the east, which we'll look at a little bit more closely, and then Bob Clowder on the edge of Lake Lemon here. Trevlack Bluffs has, again, some great glacial erratics. These are actually ones that John Lawrence has found, sent me pictures of. I went on a hike looking for it, but we had our grandchildren and we didn't quite have the freedom to explore the way I wanted. So I actually haven't seen these, but this is, I have seen conglomerates. Quartzite is a metamorphosed sandstone. It is in the metamorphic process of heat and temperature, the sand grains recrystallize and interlock, making quartzite one of the most resistant rocks on the surface, on the planet's surface. And this is a jasper conglomerate. The jasper is a red form of chalcedony. And so this is a conglomerate formed under probably similar conditions to the quartzite. So again, this, I'll spend a few minutes talking about this because this is really the Trevlack Bluffs Preserve and the Clowder Woods, Lemon Woods, span an area where I've been mapping the extent of this, the glacier that deposited these quartzite boulders. And and based on the fieldwork I've done, I take as a kind of a rough indicator of presence of boulders 20 inches and larger. I take as a indication that glacial, that boulder was deposited by glacial ice. These are big enough that they don't get moved by the hydrologic regime that's occurred in subsequent periods. And so an interesting thing about Trevlac Bluffs is if we look at the elevation of the boulders at Trevlac Bluffs, I've got some here, 780 feet, 790 feet. These are above the maximum elevation of the later Illinoisan glacial deposits. So we've got a glacial till here at 750 feet. We've got some fine grain alluvial terraces at 740. There's a glacial outwash gravel at 760. So because these big boulders are above where the Illinoisan deposits were, I interpret the boulders as having been deposited by this older glacier, which extended significantly farther than the maximum extent of the Illinois. And so this is near the maximum extent of the Illinois glacier in this in Bean Blossom watershed. There'll be a few up here, but here's a 24-inch boulder at 950 feet. That early glacier spilled over into the North Fork of Salt Creek, went down Owl Creek, Greasy Creek, near Nashville. And I will point out, we've got this as null. In my mapping, if I look in places where I think there might be boulders, and if I don't find one, I take that as an indication that the glacier did not reach that far. And by itself, one null observation isn't enough, but when combined with the looking at where boulders have been found, I can say with pretty high confidence that the glacier didn't extend as far as that preserve. I will be talking in more detail about Amy Weingartner on in my part 2, but this has a fantastic geology, and we'll have a question coming up, so I couldn't about the Lafayette gravel, and so I couldn't resist including this photograph here that shows I prefer the term Lafayette type gravel, but it has a very distinctive bronze patina, and it blew my mind when I found it all over the road, the Whitehead Trail leading down to the edge of the peninsula. Jeremy Keith Oak Reserve and Norman Upland, the western edge, Lawrence County. I haven't actually been there. I'll get there someday, might be able to say a little more, but just from what's shown on Soil Explorer, I can say with some confidence that the ridge tops at the preserve, where you see this red or pink, are the limestone of at the base of the Sanders Formation. And so there, in each of the physiographic provinces, there's a transitional area where you have the geology is a bit mixed. And in this case, the limestone is scattered enough that this preserve is included within the Norman Upland. Bean Blossom Preserve, yeah, again, fascinating, wonderful, wonderful geology. The preserve is located entirely within the floodplain of Bean Blossom Creek is at the western edge of the Norman Upland. You can see, there's in the uplands, we've got the upper parts of the Borden siltstones, and then we're seeing the base of the limestones of the Mitchell Plateau. This area is also interesting because this is about as far. So Bean Blossom Creek is maybe unique. I don't know. In having had the mouth of the creek dammed by the Illinois Glacier, blocked it. The glacier moved up the valley almost as far as Bean Blossom. Here we can see, here's glacial till soils here. But then in the upper reach, it had the glacier filled the upper reach. So we had the glacier, we had a big glacial lake during that time. And what we have in the floodplain is and what makes Bean Blossom such a great preserve for wetlands is the soils are very poorly drained. This fuchsia color is they're soils that are identified as lacustrine, meaning that they're very fine grained, drained very slowly, and deposited probably during or at least strongly influenced by the time when Bean Blossom was a big glacial lake. And but then there's a really interesting feature, this little ridge. If any of you have been to the platform that used to be, got 10 minutes left here, so I'll try to move along a bit. But this is mapped soils as a sandy outwash, and it has a complex soil stratigraphy. I've got a link to a little report I did. I got a permit from the Division of Nature Preserves with SLT's support as well. With this auger, I collected in 6-foot increments, 6-inch increments, got down to 10 feet. And it's they really, there's a lot more work I have to do on this, but there's some more to be found out for that. And the power preserve is also really, really interesting in terms of the glacial geology. So this is near, I've kind of pulled back a bit. The preserve itself is right in this area. And it's in the right at the interface between Wisconsin alluvial deposits and Illinois. The green here, and the really interesting feature here is that before, prior to the Illinois glaciation, the channel for Bean Blossom Creek flowed to the north across here. So the preserve is right on the edge and encompasses some of the old channel of Bean Blossom Creek. When the Illinois Glacier came in, the flow was diverted across a bedrock divide south of Mount Tabor. And so the current channel of the creek flows here now. And I'm guessing the probably is Jack's Defeat Creek. It probably originally flowed here. Bean Blossom Creek flowed here. They came together and joined the West Fork of the White River. Yeah, I want to go back here. What? No, I'll talk about that in the second one. But just think of try to imagine Bean Blossom Creek from here all the way up to Bean Blossom being, well, to Trevlack being a glacial lake with the glaciers filling the valley and quantities of meltwater, probably some ice rafting of boulders and things in the lake and deposited. We've got terraces all along Bee Blossom Creek. It's a real wonderful showcase for geology, glacial geology. So I've included the Cedars Preserve. It is closed. It has been a public preserve, but this is the one preserve that's in within the Mitchell Plain. It's located again near the edge of the western edge of the Mitchell Plain. You can see siltstones, Borden siltstone, start of the Crawford Upland. This probably would be West Baden group. Although this is closed for recovery, Nature Conservancy, Cedar Bluffs Conservation Area is a wonderful area, especially in the spring. And so, that's Cedar Bluffs is well worth the visit. There are two preserves in the Crawford Upland, Porter West, and it's an interesting transition. It is within the Crawford Upland. We can see that the valley of Richland Creek has carved through the limestones, siltstones, sandstones of the West Baden. This would be, again, I haven't had a chance to really walk these creeks to look at the geology, but the limestone that's exposed here, and you can see this base map is LIDAR, and you can see sinkholes here. You even see evidence of sinkholes up here. Those sinkholes may be related to limestone within the West Baden group. I don't know, but this would be probably the Paoli limestone at the top of the Blue River group. And then we have these fine-grained terraces, which were deposited by, again, another glacial lake where the Illinois Glacier blocked the mouth of Richland Creek, I think somewhere near Bloomfield. And so this was blocked. There was no actual glacial sediment, but sediment being washed during the relatively barren times when the glaciers had their maximum extent. There was a lot of erosion, and the fine-grained material was deposited in, probably filled the whole valley. And then during the Wisconsin glaciation, the continued downward erosion led the modern floodplain to erode out the terraces that had filled the valley and provide the modern floodplain. Again, Forest Canyon Preserve, I've got a lot to say about that, and we'll be doing that in covering that in part 2. This just gives you a little bit of flavor of some of the observations that I've made. This is really unusual. I mean, the preserve has two extremely interesting, unusual features. One is the Pennsylvanian Mississippian unconformity, the Mansfield Formation, and then it's right at the edge of another interesting feature called the West Baden Clastic Belt. And I'll talk more about that in part 2. So here again, we see the canyon forest is entirely in the uplands. It doesn't, the stream bed is so narrow and coarse that it doesn't even show up as alluvial soils, I think, on the soil map. But again, an interesting feature. You see this fuchsia here, that indicates, again, damming. So this stream bed was dammed by the Illinois Glacier, and there was a lake here when the glacier was at its maximum extent. So kind of the Quaternary just came up right to the edge of it, and then we've got the Mitchell Plateau. Again, wonderful, fascinating, complex geology here that I will talk about in part 2. So that brings my initial presentation to a close. I will gonna stop share. And John, I guess you'll be moderating questions. I'm at your service.
Yes, if anyone has, we have a couple questions that were submitted already, and if you have some more, please put them in the chat, and I will give those to Russell. Wanted to make well, I had a quick question of my own, as well as a bit of a story. I appreciate seeing my photos of those two glacial erratics up on top of the bluff at Trevlac, and I believe, as I recall, I found that the conglomerate one before you had talked a lot with us about the glacial erratics at Downey Hill, and I remember seeing this rock, and I'm no geologist, but it obviously doesn't belong around here. I mean, you can, especially because of that conglomeration, it's nothing you see in the uplands of Brown County. And I was really puzzled because I was wondering, why the heck did somebody drag this rock out here into the woods? It's so how did this thing get here? What the heck? So I was like, I've never seen a rock like that. So I really was validating it. I was right, my instinct that this thing was something unique. But remind us, if you would, that was brought down by the Illinoisan, correct?
No, that's so the isolated boulders, they're beyond the glacial boundary defined by glacial till, most of which is Illinoisan. There may be some pre-Illinoisan, but and that was deposited, and I did provide a link. I forgot to point it out when it was on the slide. I do have a poster that I presented at the 2020 to the North Central Geological Society of America meetings. It's actually an online presentation on my work with the glacial erratics. And in that poster, I proposed that glacier reached its maximum extent about 1.3 million years ago. So it's about a mid-Pleistocene. In the mid-Pleistocene, And it extended in, at least in some, well, really throughout the Midwest, beyond the glacial boundary as mapped by glacial till. The reason it's so old that all the original glacial material has been eroded away. In fact, there's probably, I mean, there may well have been 50 feet of erosion down cutting of the bedrock since those were deposited. So you can imagine these big boulders over hundreds of thousands of years. Everything else, all the original deposit except for the boulders, washed away. The bedrock eroded underneath it. And so these big boulders just moving over the hundreds of thousands of years down, ending up in the stream, in the stream bed, the lowest place they could be. Yeah.
That's amazing. That is really mind blowing to think that those boulders were moved down hundreds of thousands of years ago and then have been sitting there ever since, even as what was underneath eroded away. That's something else. Here's kind of a related question that's certainly over my head. Deb Patrick asks, has anyone attempted to place the quartzite boulders in a pre-Illinoisan stratigraphic position, such as with cosmic ray tracks?
Okay, I mean, we know the approximate age of the formation. And again, I didn't point out, I've got some links in one of the slides to information about the Canadian Shield, and most of these quartzite boulders are, I'm pretty sure, are the Lorraine quartzite, which I think is pre-Cambrian, dating on the order of 1.3 or 1.5 billion years old. Now, we have had some conversation at the Geological Survey about possibly cosmogenic dating of the boulders. It's not a simple matter to date. These have been.
Oh, hey, Russ. Sorry to bust in. I guess I misunderstood. Well, Deb was clarifying. She said no since glacial deposition. So.
Yes, and that's what I'm speaking to right
okay,
now.
good.
Okay.
It's over my head.
Yeah. So
no.
Cosmogenic dating, it's a technique that I don't claim to understand well. Okay, we've got several dating methods that number that we can use. There are a number that are great for the Wisconsin glaciation, going back 60,000 years or so, radiocarbon dating. And that's really good for the more recent glacial deposits, going back to several 100,000 years. There's OSL dating, optical spectral luminescence, and there's the Geological Survey is doing a lot of work in that, and we're gathering a lot of information that's providing better understanding of the Illinoisan glaciation. The boulders, the quartzite boulders, there's another technique, and again, this is not an area of expertise of mine. Cosmogenic dating, it's my understanding, works best when the deposits are buried, and if they've been at the surface. So essentially, cosmogenic dating, there's a process of once the rock, the boulder is exposed to the surface, there's a reset. And so the things that you look for cosmogenic dating. So we've had some conversations, and there may be something I'll say the conversations that I've had with folks at the survey so far haven't convinced. I feel very uncertain as to, but it is cosmogenic dating of sediments in Mammoth Cave and deposits in of the old Tays River that provide that 1.3 million date. So essentially, I feel it's reasonable to make a correlation. We do have some dates taken in entirely different contexts, but within that range and in the context of everything else, I can't give a high degree of certainty to that, and it might be that actually an ideal, that there are buried boulders, that have been exposed, and if we could know, where they are, and kind of sample those for cosmogenic dating, there could be some interesting results. And if you drive down Owl Creek from Lanham Ridge Road, they're fairly near the upper reach. There are a couple of big boulders, and when I talked to the landowner, I said, "Oh yeah, those were dug up when we put in the septic system." So that would have been fantastic. That would have been a real candidate at that time to try cosmogenic dating. So,
well, you just need to break out your dowsing rod and find those underground boulders. Sort of a follow-up on these, Dorothy asked, is Jasper conglomerate the same or similar to what is called pudding stone?
I think it's they're similar. Yeah. Yeah, they're just a different name. Yeah.
See another question. Here's a question that came in before the start. This reminds me a bit of what you were saying about the history of bean blossom bottoms and how these the geological processes of this glacial lake and the deposits have created this big flat, wet, poorly drained area that's perfect for wetlands. And so just showing how geologic processes really influence the natural communities and ecosystems that we have today. This question, maybe a little more specific, is can you talk about the hemlock trees at Trevlack and point out we also have them at our Laura Hare Nature Preserve at Back Creek in eastern Lawrence County, which isn't open to the public, and just how those hemlocks speak to the geology and past glaciation of the area.
Yeah, those the hemlocks are what are called relic stands from a much colder climate associated with the Wisconsin glaciation. So as the glaciers extended to the south, the vegetation zones moved to the south, and then with the retreat, where the microclimate was right, then species like the hemlock would survive, even though even within the microclimate they are able to reproduce, even though it's not really a species that you would expect to find in the current climatic regime.
And I'd also add, just for those who don't know, the Back Creek Preserve, like Trevlack, has a very steep bluff facing in one direction where we have that microclimate that Russ was talking about, and that's also, it's in Lawrence County, but on the eastern edge of the Norman upland, and Trevlek likewise is in the Norman upland too. Hey, our very own Susan Hayslett asks if Russ could talk more about the Illinois basin, what it looked like during the various epochs. And she said, I'm fascinated by the visual of a tropical sea or a glacial lake.
I will, I'll go into more detail on the Illinois basin in part 2 when I talk about Forest Canyon, because it's, I mean, I'll say that Forest Canyon is at the edge of a very ancient river called the Michigan River that flowed from northeastern Indiana down to the Illinois basin, and I'll be able to provide some maps that show what that drainage system looked like, and how the preserve kind of fits into that that ancient landscape.
Great. Well, we'll look forward to it. Let's see. Here's another question that came in earlier, and it is, how can landowners like Sycamore Land Trust and also private landowners use this information to help us better take care of the land? And I have some thoughts, but Russ, if you
yeah, well, I'll be, yeah, I mean, I've been, that's a great question, and I've been reflecting on it for a number of days now, and I'll be really interested in your thoughts, John. In terms of the geology, I don't have a sense that there's much in the way of, might say, practical application for land management, although kind of basic principles of geomorphology and landscape evolution, I guess that can, and certainly its understanding of those processes, how I mean, erosion is a natural process, and so it's really, I guess, from a management standpoint, it's really it's a balancing, kind of a sense of balancing understanding natural processes at the same time. And it's just coming to mind is I'm just remembering that the prairie prairie ecosystems, and this is true, I mean, all over the planet, indigenous peoples have used fire to affect the landscape in a way to maximize biological diversity, because maximizing biological diversity is good for humans. And so it's, from that perspective, understanding earth processes as a way to, and there may be situations where erosion would be okay and you might want to encourage it. But it's, kind of in the context, understanding, okay, what, how, but one thing that is very clear is thoughtless, not caring at all about the land is incredibly destructive of ecosystems, of land productivity. And so but with mindfulness, understanding of earth processes can be a helpful, say, complement to managing with the goal of enhancing ecosystem diversity.
I think that's great. And that echoes my thoughts. A lot of my thoughts to go towards the understanding the as you're saying the oh, you had a nice technical term for it. The lay of the land, the geomorphology. Is that yes? I mean, basic enough. Is it flat and poorly drained like bean blossom bottoms? Is it steep ridge? Well, of course, that makes a big difference in what natural communities would be there absent, widespread human disturbance, and what natural communities would, do well there if there's restoration to be done. And of course, the soils are very important, and that's all driven by these processes too. So I think that, geology is I was thinking about this, it's corny, but is literally and figuratively the bedrock of the nature that's going on top of it. So I think having that knowledge is very helpful for making decisions about how to manage, or manage by leaving alone certain natural areas, and also about what areas are targeted for protection. And that shows that places like Back Creek and Trevlack, a big reason that those were both protected and are state dedicated nature preserves, are because we have these really rare relic hemlock communities, and they are there because of this long geological history. And if we didn't understand that, we might just think, those trees are just growing there for some reason. Who knows? It's maybe not so special. But understanding this whole process, makes us realize, well, this is very special, and it's not going to, if they get cut down or disturbed greatly, they're not going to come back on their own. So they are really worthy of protection. So very good. And I think Randy Patrick says thanks and a great talk. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, so maybe if this seems like a good time, we do have one last question we were saving for last. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. Well, this came in early, and Russ said it's a really good one, and you can tell it is. And since he's listening, I'm going to embarrass him a little bit. This comes from the one only Carol Ritter, our good friend, former board member, our first educator and founder of Sycamore's education program, and all around great naturalist and nice guy. And a shameless plug on his behalf, he's also recently published The Magnificent Trees of Indiana, which features some really neat trees from really special natural areas all across the state, including some on Sycamore's preserve. So if you're listening in, I'm sure you would love to read it. So anyway, Carol asked a very specific geological question here. He says, are Lafayette gravels present in stream bed drainages of Sycamore properties or in nearby master base streams? And if so, what would be their origin? And if you could, if you're thinking of this already, I'm sure, Russ, but could briefly tell everyone what are Lafayette gravels. And yeah.
Okay. Yes.
That goes back to the Weingartner one, but I've been doing questions and
yeah.
Well,
Well,
that's why it's recorded.
I was delighted when this question came in, because it's just so happens that Lafayette gravels has been very specific interest of mine since I retired. And so I'm bringing up Google Earth here. The term Lafayette gravel is no longer accepted or considered. It's not, the U.S. Geological Survey doesn't recognize it as a formation name. It's got a complex history. Part of the reason for that was back in 1900 something, there was a USGS monograph that came out on the Lafayette gravels that showed Lafayette gravels all over the Mississippi embayment, and they were considered to be they generally considered to be a Pliocene, late tertiary in age. So the Pliocene is the tertiary epoch just before the Pleistocene began. And so there's a lot of different interpretations and understandings, but the type location that was proposed for the Lafayette gravel ended up being Eocene, not Pliocene. And then there was a period when they're not common, they're rare. They're particularly in outside of the Mississippi embayment. And they tend to be in small isolated patches. And there was a time when investigators said it's just better to give each little patch its own name. But I've been looking at this, I've been mapping locations of, I like the term Lafayette type gravels. This encompasses in Southern Illinois, they call it the mounds gravel, and all the rural roads are covered with. That's where I first got intrigued by this kind of gravel, and they are very highly weathered gravels, sands that generally are associated with highly weathered limestone landscapes, and very typically the gravels have, and I showed a picture, a bronze patina. The gravels are made up primarily of chert and geodes, both very highly resistant, and the how that patina forms is not well understood. There are kind of analogs in desert areas to something called desert varnish. Though desert varnish tends to be black manganese oxides, and the Lafayette type gravel patina is more iron forms of iron oxide. So what has intrigued me about the Lafayette gravel, and there aren't that many locations, is that they are often where they are found, they are on the ridge tops. They're on the highest location on the landscape. And so if you imagine, okay, here's a gravel and it's the highest position on the landscape, that means back when that gravel was deposited, that was the lowest position on the landscape. That was deposited in a river. And so piecing that together with the geomorphologists recognizing a late tertiary, I'll say early Pleistocene peneplain is the geomorphic term. just a very, not a lot of relief, undulating landscape with streams running through it. So imagine at the end of the Pliocene, early Pleistocene, that most of the highest spots here in our rugged landscape in Indiana was a gentle plain without much relief. And these gravels were deposited in the stream beds. And then remnants left remain on the surface as during the Pleistocene, glaciations came, multiple, with the glacier reach a maximum extent. This has happened, can't tell you, let's say a dozen times, more than that in the last 3 million years, where when all the ocean water in the ocean is caught up in the glaciers, the seas are low. And so the sea level hundreds of feet lower than it is now. And with the sea level lower, the landscape gets eroded. You've got the glaciers, lots of water eroding the landscape. And so this peneplain over the last 3 million years has been eroding through the glacial advances, retreats, until we have the landscape that we have right now. So these remnants, I'll say upland remnants, I've been plotting them to get a sense of what did the landscape look like at the end of the tertiary. And so looking at the screen, and most of the occurrences of Lafayette gravel I've been able to glean from various writings of Clyde Millott. Back when he was doing geology, geology was an awful lot easier than it is today because forests were cut down. Unfortunately, lots of the fields were eroded, but you could see the geology that you can't see so easily today. So if we look right down here, I've got a key here. So this point right here. So this is lot 1922. I don't know if you're seeing the pop-up coming. That's an elevation of 720 feet. That's I think that's Judah Hill, just near the Lake Monroe Dam. So that was the first location that I plotted. And imagine my amazement when hiking Amy Weingartner, I saw Lafayette type gravel. Well, just lots of it. It's still something of a mystery, and I'll talk more about that in part 2. But I've mapped 3 major different locations, say landscape positions of Lafayette gravels. There's the upland LGU. There's what I call Strath location, LGS. That represents an erosional level below the highest ridge tops, where the way I think of it, imagine it, the older Lafayette, older gravels were reworked and redeposited at lower landscape positions. And so under normal circumstances, I would consider the Amy Weingartner occurrence to be a Strath location. You can see it's got an elevation of 660 feet. The problem I ran into was I couldn't, it was all on the road. I couldn't find it weathering out of the soil. And so that led me to conclude that probably that gravel was brought in from some other location, because it makes great gravel for roads, for unsurfaced roads. And then, nicely enough, and Henry Loop is here. Henry helped me get that book out of the library. And looking through let's see, it's Stockdale's 1931 monograph on the Borden formation, noted late tertiary gravel on top of the hill at 730 feet. Well, so we got 730 feet here, right at the top of the high point in the landscape. We've got 720 feet here. And so, and I haven't, I hope someday I'll take a boat to get across there and see if I can actually, look at that gravel. But before Lake Monroe went in, I suspect that there may have been a little quarry here that took the gravel and put it on the road to the little limestone quarry that's there. Also find what I call buried occurrences of Lafayette gravel. So they're under layers of other deposits, let's see here. Lake Lemon. Okay, yeah, this is okay. Yeah, Lake. So there's Bob Clavitter. Here, let me focus in here a bit on this here. I hope you're kind of seeing me zooming in here. Okay, that's as far. So. Well, not working real well, but anyway.
Are you too? I think you're too far north.
Well, I was.
Oh
no, I was where I wanted to be.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought you were going for the marker. My bad.
No, I was wanting to get to Lake Lemon. Here we go. Yeah. So here's Lake Lemon. Here's the Bob Clavitter, Lake Lemon. Here's the dam, spillway. Bill Wayne, the Pleistocene geologist for the survey, 50s, 60s, described outwash gravels in a cut there. And in examining that, I found chert with that bronze type patina, which suggests to me that the glaciers, well, of course, anytime the glaciers would have scraped up any gravel deposits in the landscape when they, in high positions, mixed it up with everything else, and then so we can find Lafayette type gravels in glacial outwash deposits, and then just come out to look a little broader perspective here. I don't know if this is enough to pass a peer review, but I feel I can trace a stream, a Pleistocene stream valley that more or less follows Salt Creek, and then gets into the East Fork of the White River and down to Patoka, by where I've been able to plot the upland positions. And then let's just come back here. So I've plotted hundreds here, give you some idea of ages. A little bit fussy with all this. I didn't really prepare for this, but here we can see some dates for what's called in the Mississippi embayment area, upland gravel complex. So here we've got an age of 2 million years because these are, they're great. I mean, they quarry it for, and here's dates of 2.7, greater than 2.8 million years. So 1.6 to 3, greater than 3.6 million. So with cosmogenic dating, and this is a type of deposit that cosmogenic dating can work well with. We're getting dates that are late tertiary, late Pliocene, early Pleistocene. And just to, I don't know if I've got, okay. And so here's got a date of 1.3 million year for deposits from a very high terrace level of the ancestral Taze River. That's a whole nother story. But it's that date plus cosmogenic dates from the Mammoth Cave that have, it's the only thing I can hang that that old glacier that deposited those isolated boulders. So Carol, thank you for asking that. I could go on for much longer for that, but I'll,
Wow, that's amazing. It just always love to hear about these things, and it's just a kind of a mind blower to think about. All these processes have gone on for tens, hundreds of thousands, millions of years, and we're going out and seeing these rocks today, and there's so much more going on there than just rocks. It's really fascinating. So well, I think with that, probably time to draw things to a close. Kate, is there anything I have forgotten or no? All right. Well, thanks once again to Russell Boulding, and really appreciated it, and really look forward to seeing you again in April to hear more about Canyon Forest and the Weingartner-Brannigan Peninsula. So, and thanks, of course, very much to everyone who joined us tonight. Hope you had a good time and learned some things and got to maybe share a little bit in the awe of this amazingly long time span that has led us to these neat natural areas today. And thanks for all your support of Sycamore's work to protect these areas and the rocks and the plants and the critters on them. So thank you all, and have a good evening. Appreciate it. See you in April.